Good morning and welcome to the Denton Insider, where we are here to educate, collaborate, and advocate on behalf of the Denton business community. My name is Randy Skinner. I serve on the Chamber Board of Directors, and as a member, I represent my business, RS Consulting. And with me is your co-host.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Gregory. I am the Executive Director here at Stoke, which is Denton's co-working space. We're a program of the City of Denton's Economic Development Department and a proud member of the Chamber. We're really excited today that our guest in just a little bit is going to be Jason Lambert, who is going to be talking about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So really excited to jump into that conversation. But before we do, Randy, do you have a scoop?
I do. I have a quick chamber scoop for you. So happening next week is the Chamber 101 member orientation. This is being done virtually. So if you are a current chamber member and you're wanting just a refresher or reminder about all of the resources available as a member, definitely plan to tune in and sign up for the 23rd, which is Monday, for that Chamber 101. If you're not currently a member, this is a great opportunity to go ahead and join us and learn more about what the membership is going to do for you. The second quick shout out I want to do is to the Texas Women's University Jane Nelson Institute for Women's Leadership. They have a program happening Tuesday, November 24th at 5:30, and it is via Zoom. And there is no charge. So it's free to our business community. So you definitely want to head over and register. They're going to be covering insurance for small business. So I think this is something that as small business owners, as entrepreneurs, as startups, it's really easy for us to overlook an important piece that's going to protect us as we grow. So definitely head over to the chamber calendar, denton-chamber.org. Click the events tab and you'll find all of the details so that you can be a part of the chamber scoop this week.
That's awesome. I think that insurance is one of those things that it's like hard to get excited about, but is really important for your
Until
business.
you use it. And you're like, I'm so glad I had that.
Yeah, no offense to any insurance industry people out there. I know you get excited about it, but it is crucially, it's important. So that'll be an awesome event. Oh, cool. So let's jump into our conversation with our guest today. Today we are talking to Dr. Jason R. Lambert, who is an award-winning researcher and assistant professor of management in the College of Business at Texas Women's University. He also provides diversity climate change consulting at careermentornet.com and is a co-founder at bizona.com. So he is a fellow entrepreneur as well as an educator. He received his Ph.D. in business administration from the University of Texas at Arlington, and he is here with us today. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Heather. Hi, Randy. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, thanks for sharing your time with us this morning. I, had the opportunity to hear you briefly when you spoke at the Chamber Board Strategic Planning meeting, and you just had so much insight that I think is so important for our business community now more than ever, right? It's always been important, but now it's just such an opportunity for us to learn more about what this looks like as business owners. And so we're excited because we got one of the experts here with us.
Well, thank you. I try my best. There are many that are doing a lot of great work in the area. Hopefully, I was always attracted to diversity and inclusion because of where I grew up. I used to be a manager for a government entity, and I would always see the unequal distribution of resources across the city in my hometown. And so that was always something that intrigued me as to why does this happen? What's the human behavior behind the decision making that occurs that ultimately affects other people, whether that's employees or patrons, customers, constituents. I appreciate you calling me an expert, but I know so many people who are doing this work that are doing awesome work. But hopefully today I can kind of give you shed some light, some insight, greater insight into DEI and how organizations can leverage that, take advantage of it in the best way.
So what does that look like? I mean, for a business or for an organization, where do you start? Where do you start, like, having that dialogue, or reflecting on your business practices? What do you kind of tell people when they're wanting to do this work?
That's a great question, because I think a mistake that many companies do is they take the assumption that they know what has to be done. They assume that they know what their problem is when it comes to DEI. They assume they know how to address it. So what I typically tell organizations is the first thing you want to do is you want to evaluate or assess your organization. And so we do that through identifying it and identifying the problem. What are your blind spots? What are some things going on in the organization that you may not be aware of throughout all different levels of your company? Because as a leader of an organization, it's very difficult to know about everything that's going on, especially when you become removed from those in the different levels of your organization. And so my co-author and I, Dr. Ekendayo Akinlade, we're actually working on a book that should be completed by the end of this year. And if you don't mind a shameless plug, if you visit careermentornet.com, you can sign up to be on our wait list at careermentornet.com. But our framework takes us through 6 stages that companies need to go through. And the first stage and it's called the Imagine framework. So the Imagine framework, which is a framework for diversity, equity, inclusion, climate change. And that first stage, the I stands for to identify, because we have blind spots. We may not know what we need to address. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're having a difficult time recruiting women employees. Now, we know that it's illegal to just say we only want to recruit women, right? Because we don't want to have that situation. It also backfires if they're perceived as some sort of a token employee. But companies might hire women employees, for example, and they can't, and they have a high degree of turnover among their women employees, or maybe women employees are not attracting them to their labor pool. And so they might think that the problem lies in the candidate herself, when actually, unless they really take a deep dive and analyze how they recruit, what the culture looks like, there could be so many other variables involved that explains why either they cannot attract women candidates, or when they hire women employees, that there's a high degree of turnover. And so it's important to first make sure that that first step, that identification step occurs. Otherwise, anything that comes after that will lead you along the wrong path, because the foundation was not set in place.
What are some of the ways that you found that are most successful for companies to identify? Because I imagine that that's hard to do, because you're asking people to give their feedback, their opinions, and if there's a problem, I don't know that I'd feel comfortable or safe speaking up, right? Because my job's on the line, right? If that culture is not there, then I don't know that I would say anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. Most people fear change, and most people want to maintain their sense of anonymity, especially when we're discussing sensitive topics like diversity, right? And so one of the best ways to, first of all, it's important to recognize that as leaders, we don't know what the problem is. That's the first step, to not make that assumption. The second thing is there are a number of surveys that that organizations can administer to their employees and we're talking about multiple choice surveys, Likert scales, where they're asked questions and they have to respond, on a scale from maybe 1 to 7. Questions asking about how they feel included with the organization. Do they sense any conflict with fellow employees? Things like this that to kind of measure what is the pulse of the employees here at our organization and their attitudes towards the organization, measuring how strongly they identify with the organization, what their level of commitment is, their job satisfaction. And then what we do is we correlate those responses with their perceptions of climate in the organization. So it's not enough just to measure the climate of the organization in regards to diversity. We want to, in a sense, match that with other variables in the organization to see how these relationships, if there are any relationships, whether they're positive or negative. And the best way to do this too is to hire an external third party, if you will, someone outside of the organization, what we call an external change agent, so that employees will feel or believe that their answers, their responses, there's a degree of confidentiality that they can trust and respect based on how they answer. And that's good for the organization because you want your employees to be as honest and transparent as possible. And if they do fear that there's a sense of backlash that might occur because of the way that they respond, then you will have that what's known as that kiss of yes. People will respond favorably in the way that they believe their leaders or the organizations want them to respond. I've been in like focus groups with employees and in meetings where leaders have asked people questions like a town hall forum with employees and asked for them to share their attitudes, their advice, feedback. And I've seen individuals raise their hand and say, hey, can we do this anonymously? Or if I have a question, can I write it down and someone else ask the question? And I've seen leaders say, well, no, I'd like for this to be a safe space. We can all talk. And it's fine to believe that. But this is an example of how we could be so far removed from the culture of our organization because we have so many hats to wear, so many challenging decisions that we have to make, that we make this mistake in believing that all the employees feel the same way. And so it's nothing wrong with if employees answer with a certain degree of anonymity and you give them channels, they're anonymous, that's not a bad reflection of the culture of your organization. That's just the reality of what it is to be a human being, right? And so, and many people want to have that sense of anonymity so they can speak their truth and not worry about any backlash. Because unlike when we're maybe at church or playing on a softball league or something like that, an organization is different because it's tied to our livelihood. We get a paycheck every 2 weeks, and what happens is we don't want to put employees in that position where they may fear that they will no longer get that paycheck because they're speaking their truth. That ultimately helps the organization.
Mm-hmm. So I think we probably have listeners that have, larger organizations, 50 plus employees. But I think a lot of the people that are tuning in are going to have really small teams. For example, my team is 3 people, including me. So for the small, a small retail business, right? So that's my team. My team is 3 people, but I have 85 customers, members that are in and out every day. So how do you think about it? Maybe your actual staff is small, but how do you think about it in terms of the holistic view, right? Your customer facing, or how what are some things that those smaller organizations can do to do the same work?
First of all, I want to commend you for being very proactive and thinking about how you want your workforce to be diverse, because it is very difficult when you do have a small team. And I think many larger companies initially were concerned about this because of the federal legislation that they're under. If you're a small business owner under a certain number of employees, it does not necessarily apply to you when we look at some of the laws that protect people based on protected by the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, which is race, gender, sex, religion. But if you are a small team, it's good to think outside of the box in how you recruit your employees if you want to think of a competitive advantage in how your employees interact with customers, or how your employees, how the face of your workforce might look to attract a more diverse group of customers or patrons. And so things like, hiring at historically Black colleges and universities, visiting Black chambers or Latinx chambers, or chambers for women, being a part of organizations such as, I know, for example, TWU as the Women Center for Entrepreneurs and the Jane Nielsen Institute for Leadership. So if you're someone who's maybe you want to hire more women, or you want to just create a labor pool to choose from candidates that are more diverse, it's important to be intentional on where you target your recruitment efforts. And then from that, you can create yield ratios to see what is the efficacy of this new recruitment strategy that you've developed. So when how many from this institution versus this institution actually convert into employees that perform very well, or how does that meet the bottom line? Because I don't know if there's any empirical research on this, but I know anecdotally, people who I know, whether friends of mine, whether they're Latinx or Black, if they go to a spot and it's someone there who looks like them, me personally, I get excited. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Okay, because sometimes there's a level of comfort people have when they're able to interact with people who look like themselves, especially surrounding things like business, finance, money, and et cetera, because there's this assumed, because it's not necessarily factual, but assumed sense that there's a shared culture there, right? And so, so if you have a small team, that's one of the things I would first recommend. Be intentional about where you hire, finding your best employees, getting referrals from them, because usually people who form well have friends and family who also might fit that same bill. And I'm hoping that it will be difficult, but that's a strategy I would give someone who has a small organization. And I'm not sure if that answered your question specifically, but I assume that that's kind of what you were asking me.
Yeah, no, it definitely answered it for sure.
Okay.
I maybe should have asked this question earlier, but I would love for you to hit on, so you said diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
So I think that a lot of people, like, the word equality is like stuck in their head. So can you just talk a little bit about why it's equity and not equality?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think the best way to explain that is to paint a picture of an image that I saw recently. And you may have seen this image as well, where it compares equity and equality, where there are three people, three different heights, and they're trying to view a baseball game. And there's a fence that's blocking them. And so an example of equality was to give each of these individuals a stool to stand on so that they can see over the fence, right? But equity means that, how about we just remove the fence? And so when we talk about equity and equality, equality relates to this idea of resources for all. But equity is asking the question, how do we distribute these resources? Let's say that we all were able to go to a bank and cash in $100. I go to the bank, they give me, a $100 bill. Someone else, they give them 100 singles. What about that person who walks to the bank and they give that individual 100 not 100 pennies. It'll be more.
I can't do the math, but
Yeah.
You see,
a lot.
that would be kind of now that becomes a burden. And so there's equality, but there's not equity because it wasn't distributed the same way, maybe distributed over time. The way maybe someone gets one lump sum, somebody gets different payments. And so now they don't have the opportunity to even use that income in the most efficient way possible. And so, I like to think of equality as its distribution of resources. When we think about equity, this is procedural, how these resources are distributed so that everyone can actually access and utilize it in the same manner.
Perfect.
That's a really important distinction, because I think it's something that's so easy to say, oh, well, it is equal. We have equality, right? That's something that's easier to think that we have.
Yeah.
But when you look at equity, you can't deny, right, like where that exists and doesn't exist. So I think learning more about what that looks like, and going back to what you said of being intentional about where that exists in our businesses and how we're bringing that into the business community. So one of the things that I have that kind of stood out to me is, you were talking about recommending to business owners that they begin to identify what their problems are, and that oftentimes bringing in a change agent, bringing in that outside person or team to help navigate this. When we're looking at DEI, it's an investment. It's an investment of time. It's often, I'm sure, an investment of resources. Can you speak a little bit to the ROI on that? Because creating this environment that is truly equitable, there's no doubt that it's going to result in better productivity. If I like where I am and I'm happy where I am, I'm definitely going to work much harder.
Yeah,
also better ideas, right? There's just like better ideas when there are more viewpoints and perspectives.
So better ideas, more perspectives, that leads to creativity, better innovation. In regards to retention of employees who feel included because they feel like there's a sense of belonging, they like being there. Even when we look at intentionality in how we recruit, that gives us a larger labor pool to select from. And so if you have a larger labor pool to select from, you're going to increase your likelihood, your chances of selecting the best candidate for the job, the best qualified candidate for the job. And so when we look at ROI, those are some of the returns that companies can experience. However, there's a lot of mixed research, mixed findings, where diversity can also correlate with a sense of conflict. It can correlate with the sense of higher turnover, specifically mostly among whites and men. It can also, sometimes we can have a less innovation, but it's because going back to the framework, organizations, they begin to implement a lot of diversity initiatives without thinking consciously about the paths that are needed in order to do so. And so what happens is, without identifying what needs to be done first, and without preparing the organization for diversity climate change, what happens is we can experience some backlash. And so that might be some of the explanation as to why we do see mixed results in the research regarding the relationship between diversity and organizational outcomes. There's some other research by Orlando Richard that talks about how firms can experience positive outcomes based on the type of perspective that organizations hold in their business model. So when companies have an innovative perspective, when they're focused on innovation and on creativity, they're more likely to experience positive outcomes when having a diverse organization. And so, so that means that maybe not every organization has to have their own different approach. There's no cookie cutter approach to being able to leverage the benefits of diversity in your organization. And that's I think, a challenge that many organizations don't understand. They think, well, they did it this way, so I can do it this way, or we can do what this company or my competitors did over here, and it will work for us. Then they might get frustrated when it doesn't happen because they were trying to apply this cookie cutter approach instead of creating these diversity initiatives that are unique to their own organization. And that's how you want to, and that's how an organization can have diversity work for their company. When they look at it as a unique opportunity and not try and do what everyone else does, because everyone has their own unique issues when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Can you talk a little bit about, I don't even know exactly how to ask this question. What you're saying about applying somebody else's solution to your own business, or, you see all of these companies around you starting to have these conversations. How do you, and I've heard you talk about kind of laying the groundwork and really being intentional, but how do you do it in a real genuine way, as opposed to being performative or doing it because you feel like, you're leaving yourself in a vulnerable spot if you're not talking about it, right?
Oh, okay. You mean as, so if I understand you correctly, talking about diversity in your company in a way that does not make you vulnerable, is that, or having other employees feel comfortable engaging in this type of dialogue?
Yeah, where it's coming from a genuine place and from an authentic desire, as opposed to performing the thing because you feel that you need to. Okay. Yeah, you've checked the box.
We have we have checked DEI.
Yeah.
Right. I understand where you're coming from. So yeah, because there are three perspectives. There are those companies that check the box, and there's a perspective for that. I think it's called the access and legitimacy perspective, meaning that they have diversity efforts just so they can legitimize themselves and have access to different markets that reflect various identity groups. Right. And so how do you kind of go past it or elevate above that is by really taking a close look at your culture. And our framework, the Imagine framework, our book, draws from the change management research and looks at this, because most people fear change, especially when you're changing culture. And when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's essentially what has to happen. And so that actually brings me to the second letter in Imagine, is to mitigate. You have to be able to mitigate what's going on in your organization, mitigate any potential problems that you see on the horizon. And so this training is very key. Things like unconscious bias training or building empathy through perspective taking exercises, sitting down, asking employees, for example, if you were fill in the blank, how would you feel about working for this organization? Right. So if I'm as a Black man, asking me, if you were Asian American, or if you were an immigrant, or if you were a woman, how would you feel about working for this organization? So it kind of gives them an opportunity to be empathic and think outside of themselves. And so by doing that, there's research that shows that when people are then surveyed on, their attitudes towards different identity groups, they have more favorable attitudes towards them. So that's one thing, because sometimes people don't know, and I've come from the perspective that that's okay, because many of us grow up in these silos. I grew up in the city of Chicago, and Chicago, Midwest overall, is pretty segregated when it comes to neighborhoods. And so I remember teaching students when I taught in Chicago too, in the university level, who had never seen a Black person before they saw me in front of the classroom. I had never seen, I think maybe one white person like interacting daily, like school and things like that, not until I got to high school and then college. And so when we're in these silos, these siloed environments, it makes sense. It's natural for us to create stereotypes, have assumptions, and also feel less comfortable when we're around people who we're not as familiar with, right? And so, so having this unconscious bias training, having people think outside of themselves, helps them kind of bring down these barriers, helps them think differently about this us versus them mentality, and becomes more of a we. And there are many other key things that can occur in your organization that can prevent diversity climate change from happening that we want to look at. Again, drawing from the change management research, there's this activity known as a force field analysis. Many of you probably learned about it in school a long time ago, but it's very useful, where you put on one side your forces for change, what's causing you to change, or why do you need to change? And on the other side, what are the excuses for not changing? What are these excuses for status quo? So, for example, let's say I want to lose weight. I want to get more healthy. You know, that's a force for change. Status quo, oh, I don't have enough time, or I don't have the right equipment. I'm coming up with all these reasons. And so what I need to do is find a way to eliminate these forces for status quo so that change can happen, change can occur. So that means, maybe do some time management, find the equipment that I need. Instead of going to the gym, I work from home, so that all these forces of status quo disappear, these excuses, so that I can change. So translated into the organization, what that means is, let's say, for example, a force for change is that you realize that your competitors are gaining some market share because they have a more diverse sales force, and so they're able to target different identity groups, right? Or just say that, as a leader, you want to do the right thing, and you know that a diverse workforce is healthy for your employees and for your organization, because then everyone feels included. But there are going to be some forces for status quo, some forces, some excuses. You're going to have employees that say, "Oh, we don't need to change," right? Blind spots. They think everything's okay. You're going to have some employees that might believe that if things change, what does that mean about my job? Or, you have people who might feel uncomfortable. So what we need to do is we need to reduce these forces for status quo. Explain to them why we need to change. Talk to them, your employees, about the benefits of diversity. Have messaging everywhere, from every single meeting to every single memo to the poster in the lunchroom. All of that to get people on board, to kind of to get people excited about the change. If you have people who think, well, we don't need to change, talk to them about the statistics such as, there's research that shows that that white men with college degrees get hired at the same rate as a Black man with a high school diploma. Statistics where research shows that you can have a white person with a criminal background get hired at the same rate as a Black man without one. So then they understand, oh, I didn't know this, because most people, we don't know this information, right? The news doesn't cover it, but we can only discover this through people, like we said before, all these great diversity researchers out here, like experts, doing a lot more work than me as well, who are able to pinpoint what's going on in our society that we don't know about it. And so then they have this aha moment, like, oh, okay, now I get it. Change has to happen. Diversity is important, and now I understand why. And the hard truth is, it may not work for everyone either. And so you may not be able to change all of the attitudes, but at least you can change the behaviors, because the norms will change. And over time, you'll begin to have this natural, healthy turnover. Over time, your organization will be one that truly values diversity. It doesn't happen overnight, but it happens over time, and it is possible.
And now's the time to get started if you're not already. So, I mean, I know we've kind of covered a few different topics all around this theme, and by no means can we finish the conversation today. So will you remind folks one more time, where can they go to connect with you, to get on your email list, and just learn more about some of the work that you're doing?
Great, thank you. Well, if everyone visits careermentornet.com, and that's spelled the way it sounds, CARREERMEN CARREERMENTORNET.com. You can find a lot of information, what the topics, the seminars, the workshops that I am and my team offers. You can also actually have a site on bizona.com as well. So if you go to bizowna.com, it's a brand new tech startup. I have a profile there as well. If you just type in my name, Jason Lambert, it'll pop up, and there's information there where you can reach me too. So those are the best two places to reach me. And as always, I'm an assistant professor at Texas Women's University, and I can be found there as well, working with our great students that we have. And that's where and I thank TWU because they're able to support a lot of the research that I and my colleagues do in DEI, in the DEI space.
That's awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much, Jason, for coming and spending your time with us this morning, and really going to encourage folks to go get connected over at careermentornet.com so that you can continue this conversation and check out some of those workshops. So Heather, what do we have coming up in the next few weeks?
Well, next week, can you believe we are like closing in on 2020? It's like the shopping season is starting, the holiday season. I had a conversation this morning, like, are you listening to Christmas music yet or not?
Yes.
Well, next week we get to talk to Christine Gossett, who is the head of the Main Street Association. And so we're going to talk about some resources for small business owners and retailers to make sure that they are set up and ready online, that they have everything kind of squared away to be selling all of their fantastic wares for the holiday season. She's also going to talk about some of the events that Main Street has going on to encourage people to buy local this holiday season. So that's what we have coming up next week.
Sounds good. I hear they're doing things not only to make it easier for the businesses, but to make it for consumers to be able to shop a little bit easier locally.
Mm-hmm. So that's right. They've launched some new stuff. So she's going to tell us all about that.
All right. So we'll see y'all next Wednesday.
Yeah. See everybody next Wednesday. Thanks again, Jason.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.